It's starting to slow a bit with folks joining, so we can go ahead and get started. Good morning and welcome everyone. I'm Kyla Carlson. I am the Director of Programs with COACT Detroit. We are hosting today's Corporate Social Responsibility panel. If you're not familiar with COACT, I'm just going to take a few minutes to tell you a bit about us. COACT is a hub for nonprofits to get connected to resources and to each other. On a typical day before COVID, that includes our space. We have a 6,500 square foot space located in New Center, Detroit. It's available for meetings and events and specifically accessible for nonprofits. Last year, we provided over $60,000 in in-kind space to nonprofit and community organizations. Our space has been closed since COVID, and so all of our programming has shifted to virtual like this panel, but normally we would be welcoming you into our space, having coffee and bagels and some networking. But aside from the space itself, COACT also offers capacity building programming. We work with other partners in the region to be a centralized space for capacity building programming to land. And then we try to fill the gaps with the programs that we create ourselves. So we host a nonprofit well-being series, things like weekly meditation and time management workshops to support the mental health and well-being of nonprofit professionals. We know that it's a tiring and exhausting job. It's hard work. And so that's very important to us to uplift opportunities for self-care and community care and healing in the sector. We also host conversation series like the one you are joining today, as well as workshops. So you can visit our website, coactdetroit.org, to see what other programs we have available right now. If your organizations are thinking about returning to the workplace or maybe have started to return to the workplace, we're also hosting a virtual webinar series right now in partnership with Michigan Community Resources, who's one of our panelists today, Michigan Nonprofit Association, and the Council of Michigan Foundations on reimagining the nonprofit workplace. So we cover a series of topics to not only think about the tactics of what you need to return for your staff safely, but also how we can take this as an opportunity to really reimagine our workplaces. And then the third component of COACT is really providing space for network connectivity and collaboration. And so this series specifically is designed for not just nonprofit organizations, but also folks from the corporate sector, the government sector, to really be a space where we can talk together about our shared interest in our community and social impact. So we're very excited for today's conversation, and with that, I'll turn it over to Gary Dems, our moderator. Gary is the leader of the Nonprofit Personnel Network, and I'll give him the chance to introduce himself.
Great, thanks so much, Kyla, and good morning, everybody. We have a great panel and a good block of time ahead of us, and we want to make this as interactive as possible. But let me introduce the panelists that have agreed to be on this. This is I think our 4th out of 5 panels around corporate social responsibility. And this is going to be a very robust conversation on something called skill-based volunteering, skill-based giving. We'll get into the difference in a little bit. But with us this morning, with a very unique perspective, I'll start with Shelley Danner. Shelley is the program director of Challenge Detroit. She joined Challenge Detroit in 2012. It's an innovative fellowship model. Shelley coaches and guides the leadership development of the fellows in design thinking and helps determine their challenge projects in collaboration with the partners in the nonprofit sector. She spent 7 years in DC with Accenture, a global tech and management firm, worked with public and private sectors, and has a great background with talent and leadership development and a very unique perspective on some of the things that are happening pre-COVID and post-COVID in Detroit. So welcome, Shelley. We have with us Shmail Dobbs, who has been the CEO of the Michigan Community Resources Organization for the last 10 years, a native New Yorker, a graduate of New York University, but also a proud graduate of the University of Michigan School of Social Work, where she got her master's degree, and then her JD from Wayne State University. She has a passion for social justice and also some of the major issues facing communities of color. In New York this morning, we have with us Alex Racklin, who is a senior associate at JP Morgan Chase. As most of you know, JP Morgan Chase has made great strides in the Detroit market specifically, and is putting a lot of resources into this market. She's on the employee engagement and volunteerism team at JP Morgan Chase. She supports their Service Corps program, which strengthens the nonprofit organizations and leverages the talent and expertise of the JP Morgan Chase employees. And she also has an extensive background in the charter school arena. So welcome to all three of you, and really appreciate your time this morning. I wanted to, in doing my research for this session, I noticed that the Stanford Social Innovation Review, which some of you read, they're really on the cutting edge of a lot of things going on in the nonprofit sector and how it relates to other sectors. They said in all the array of corporate citizenship programs, skill-based volunteering and skill-based giving is the most rapidly growing. And what I want to kick off the session with is get everybody on the same definition of what that means, but also how it's changed in the COVID environment. You don't have masses of people from corporations now volunteering in the community. You might, but it's changed a lot. So I want to start off with getting a little bit of definition for everybody to be on the same page, and talk about how COVID may have changed that structure and the pace of that change going forward. So I'm going to go to Shamail first, because I think you have a great view of what's happening in the Detroit market.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. So I think from a very traditional sort of lens, if you will, the definition, as I would define it, most certainly are corporations or organizations that have individuals with a particular skill, talent, that, you know, there's a willingness of that corporation or that organization to want to have their staff volunteer time for the behest or the benefit of a nonprofit organization or a group of individuals. I think outside of that, I would even break the norm a little bit and expand the definition to include individuals. And it may not necessarily be those that, you know, may be working for a traditional corporation, but it may be individuals who are retired or those that have worked in a particular field, but again, have a skill that they're interested in sharing with a corporation or organization. So that's the way that I would define it broadly and loosely. And I'm sure my other co-panelists will add to that, that definition as well. But to the extent of your question, Gary, and just to pivot slightly and not take up too much time, you know, in this landscape, especially with COVID, as you can imagine, most organizations and individuals, like so many of us, are joining in remotely to be able to, you know, learn new things, garner new skills, et cetera. And, you know, as corporations are thinking about more creative ways to lean in and support organizations, organizations themselves are trying to figure out how they can tap into those resources as well. And as you can imagine, in a landscape where there's a digital divide, not everyone may have the same access to technology. That can create some tension. So, you know, the opportunity, if you will, in my mind, we'll of course get into, you know, much more robust conversation around this, is having corporations and, you know, organizations and philanthropy with the ability to support organizations to think through their technology needs and their capacity needs, really figure out ways that in this landscape, we can ensure that those with the least and those that may be struggling to figure out how to stretch their dollars have access to plug in ways, you know, that can help increase their mission.
That's great, and I think we want to focus on that as we go along, because one of the things we've all learned is that a majority of the nonprofits in the state of Michigan and even nationally are small. They're $1 million and under versus some of the legacy ones that we hear about all the time. Shelley, I'll throw that over to you next to answer that question, and maybe tell folks a little bit more too about your program and how it works.
Thanks, Gary. So first, I'll just share a little bit of context about Challenge Detroit. So we are a professional and leadership fellowship program. It's a year-long program, and I do want to acknowledge that both Kyla and Charnay, who work at COACT, are alumni of our fellowship program. So really excited to see them just really accelerating their career growth after the program and continuing to do really good work in our community here. We partner with companies and organizations in Detroit to create fellowship placements for what we kind of call early career professionals, although there isn't any kind of age limit. But we really focus on what we call intellectual service or intellectual giving. So not only do fellows in our program get that career experience working at a company Monday through Thursday, but then on Friday, that organization supports their time out of the office and working in the community alongside nonprofits and getting some of the training that will help them contribute in the community. And I can share more about those projects and those partnerships because it's a huge part of skills-based giving. But building off of what Shamil started us off with, a couple of other points that I would add. When I think about skills-based volunteering or skills-based giving, there's a nice distinction that we can make between kind of some service that's called like done in a day versus deeper engagement. So while you can do skills-based work, in a short period of time, often skills-based giving and volunteering happens over a longer period of time. So if you think about all the menu of options for how we can give and contribute to the nonprofit sector, there's of course a lot of hands-on service and donations and things like that. But with the skills-based giving and that skills-based service, there's really an opportunity to give in a more engaged and potentially long-term way. So it's more than a day, typically.
Great. And maybe with a little bit of a national focus on some of these trends, I'll throw it over to Alex.
Thanks, Gary, and thanks everyone for having me today. I would just, to add to Shamil and Shelley, I think Shelley pointed it out a little, but one thing that we really think about when we're thinking about skills-based volunteering is the difference between skills-based versus hands-on. So to Shelley's point, the done in a day, you can go to a food bank and you could pack food, and a lot of people have the skills to be able to do that, right? We can all use our hands to be able to do that. But in skills-based, we really focus on supporting an organization or a business with something particular, whether that be a business challenge that they're facing, something they're working towards for their mission that they can't get to. So we really think about it as we're leveraging the skills that our employees have, because we're, at JP Morgan, we're lucky enough to have thousands and thousands of employees. And so we want to use their skill set and expand their skill set to help deepen our impact in our communities, the communities in which we live and work. So we really focus on using our employees' skills to make a larger impact in the nonprofit sector and in the communities we serve.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about the top skill sets that are needed these days with the perception from the nonprofit sector. And I'll throw that over to Shamil maybe to talk about what you're seeing, whether it's the grassroots organizations or even some of the mid to big size organizations. We tend to think that it's about board service, board governance, and the like. But what are the skill sets that you think the nonprofit sector needs, and the best way for corporations and small businesses to plug in to fill those needs in sort of the changing environment?
So let me offer, Gary, and for those that are listening online, it's really not monolithic. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Every organization is unique. Their needs are unique. Their budget sizes are unique. The gaps that may be present with respect to leadership skills and or diversification of their board and their ability to lean in is also unique. But I think if I were to bucket it, I would bucket it in the general categories that really offer the opportunity for nonprofits to truly be resilient. So it's everything from fund development support, IT support, marketing, communications. I think Alexandra lifted up, the ability to think through strategic plans. So it's all of the things that will create for a stronger organization. And those particular buckets are, in my opinion, the ways in which corporate partners or skill-based volunteers can lean in. Also, legal assistance as well is another big one. Of course, I would be remiss in not mentioning that, given the fact that our company and our organization has provided pro bono, legal assistance. So I would say for those that are interested in volunteering, and particularly for those on the line that are nonprofit organizations, part of the homework, if you will, is truly understanding your organizational needs, being able to have an assessment done to really look at the strengths and the gaps and the opportunities for where, general support can really advance the mission of your organization, and then figure out if there's a corporate partner or skill-based opportunity that can plug in to fit that unique need.
Okay, any perspective on that from you, Shelley?
I think Shamil really got that across very well. And I would just add that, of course, now due to COVID, I think there's certainly a lot of reimagining. And I think actually Shamil alluded to this at the very beginning. But all organizations are really looking at, okay, how do we move forward in a virtual environment? And especially for nonprofit organizations, which may not have as many resources on the tech side, that's a really important need, I think, that's emergent and will continue. And then, of course, reimagining programming and how to do virtual volunteering and how to, create safety amongst operations that are essential in the nonprofit sector. Those could all be things that are, skills-based volunteers could support.
And Alex, from your standpoint, what are you seeing from the corporate view?
I think, I'm on board with everything that Shamil and Shelley said. I think what we're seeing is a real need for support in pivoting current programs, right? I know a lot of organizations, of course, do on-the-ground programs. You want to meet with the people in the community and be with them and have that engagement. And, of course, given COVID, where that opportunity has been taken away from us. So figuring out how to transition programs from that in-person engagement to a digital program, right? A virtual program, but still likely, with the same income, revenue, whatever that may be for the organization. And I think that transition is where we see organizations needing support. Something I will note is one thing we saw, right when COVID hit hard in the US starting in March, is we did see this lull in the need for skills-based volunteerism. And I think it was, that panic stage of like, we need to get our ducks in a row before, we can come in and support. So from our lens, we wanted to be there, we wanted to support, but we also had to realize that we need to let organizations get their bearings and figure out what they need before, 5 JP Morgan Chase employees or any other corporate funder comes in and helps you figure out what you need, because you need to get there yourselves so that we can then help you, get to the finish line and cross the finish line. So I think that's something that's been a really interesting trend through COVID, is there was really this pause and everyone needing to figure out, I think, from our side too, we had to figure out how we were going to move all of our programs virtually as well. And so there was really a transition point, I would say, in the time when COVID hit, to figuring out how we can now, we realize that we're in this for a while now, potentially for a long haul, and how can we all support each other and make sure that we're still supporting the communities that we live in.
Yeah, and if I may just quickly back in, Gary, I think what I would offer alongside that is that the modality of your mission looks different in this type of environment. And being able to communicate what that looks like, not only to the extent of being able to garner volunteers, but even to your funders, to be able to tell a story of how we can still carry through the lens of our mission, knowing that the landscape has shifted, our clients' needs have shifted, the way in which we can operate our physical offices have shifted. So, you know, all of that I think is playing into, again, the time that you mentioned that organizations absolutely need to be able to pivot and then reframe and refocus.
And I want to go to a question from the audience, but I want to clarify and touch on something that branches off this. And Shamil, that you spoke about the need for the nonprofits to sort of grid out what their needs are, so that they know what their needs are when they're approaching the volunteer base. So most organizations probably have not done the grid. I wonder if there's a best practice out there, maybe even that your organization might have, or M&A might have, to grid out what the needs of the organization are for the volunteers. Are there best practices in that arena? And then I want to talk about the matching in just a second too, and flipping that over to Alex. But how are you seeing the best practices for nonprofits to determine their needs for volunteers rather than scatter shooting?
Absolutely. So I think there are, you know, amazing assessment tools and capacity building services that are out there. You lifted up one. M&A has an assessment tool. You can actually go through the auspices of COAC to connect to M&A, or go directly to M&A if you are part of their membership base, to you know, participate in the assessment process. If you are connected to intermediary or capacity building service provider like Michigan Community Resources, like New in Ann Arbor, Nonprofit Enterprise at Work, like One Place in Kalamazoo, there are several intermediary organizations, nonprofit intermediary organizations, that can either provide, you know, official, if you will, assessment services, or if it's an opportunity to sit down in office hours and have a one-on-one appointment where they can suss out perhaps your unique needs. Again, there are different variations of best practices that lend itself through, again, these service providers that can help nonprofits to figure out their unique needs. So the suggestion for those on, you know, on the video, on the call, if you will, is to find a local capacity building service provider. COAC most certainly can help navigate that process as well. You can most certainly go there now in a virtual capacity to determine, you know, what's the best place to start and where you can go to get your needs met.
Great, a lot of great resources out there. We do have a question from Renee, who is on the call, and she asked that there seems to be an influx of skill-based platforms that are allowing more virtual opportunities to connect with the nonprofit organizations, and she gives the example of Catch a Fire and some other ones. Are there any that are gold standard? Are there any certain benchmarks that a company or organization can look at in that arena? And I don't know if any of the three panelists have experience with any of those.
I don't have experience per se, but I can say, having heard of all of them, I think that they are good resources. I would always say, you know, you should explore, do the research, but I know many organizations do use those resources, and you're able to get a lot of times volunteers from different sectors or different companies, different organizations to come support you through those programs. So it can give a really unique lens to the support you need at your organization.
And can you expound on that for just a second? I'm unfamiliar with both of those platforms, and talk about how they work. Are they specifically matching, and are they specific to certain markets then when an organization plugs into those? So
I can give my best information here. I'm not an expert, as I have not used them, but my understanding is they work with an organization to build out a need that they have, a challenge, a scope of work potentially, and many corporations use those websites and allow their employees to specifically sign up for an experience. And what that can mean, depending on the site, is employees from different companies can all sign up for the same project. And then once there is a full team for that project, whatever that team size may be, then they go ahead and facilitate the skills-based volunteerism program virtually. I don't know, Shelley or Shamil, if you have more experience than I do.
I would say, I mean, there's several, and you mentioned a few of them, Gary. There's Catch a Fire, there's Taproot, there's Common Impact, there's In-Core Talent Works. You know, like any matchmaking site, it really varies in terms of your own experience and what you're looking for. What I would offer, and Alex lifted this up, is, you know, they're designed, if you will, these platforms are designed for ease of the corporations to be able to plug in and have their employees and or staff be able to, you know, sort of list out, you know, skills, or individuals who may have interest and time to volunteer to list out their unique skills and interests that they would like to sort of offer out to the sector. And given some of them are national platforms, you may have a team that may be based out in California that can help a nonprofit organization that may be in New York, for example. But I say all that to say, I would do your homework, do your due diligence. There are localized platforms and organizations that provide, if you will, matchmaking services. MCR is a great example where we've been matching nonprofit organizations with attorneys for the last 20 years. So, I mean, in terms of gold standard or best practice, it's really, to me, individualized. It's really about the type of experience you're looking for. If a national platform that offers an opportunity to connect to a national market is something that you're interested in, I would say check out those websites. If you're looking for a much more localized approach to localized solutions and looking for individuals that may be better in touch with your organization's unique needs, then I would do your homework and look at what organizations locally are available to perhaps provide a similar service. But no right or wrong, it's just what you're looking for and what your needs are.
Right, and from the, Shelley, you're gonna say something? No?
Thanks, Gary. I was just going to come at it from the opposite side, which is, of course, there are these platforms and the matching and, you know, the advantage of course, doing things virtually is that you can have organizations that may not be local. But the work that we do in the skills-based giving that we do is very localized. And so we really, another way that I would offer to do the matching, or just to find the connection point between skills-based volunteers and organizations that are interested in it, is really through relationships. And so thinking about, you know, who do you know in your community? The way that we create nonprofit partnerships is through being really active and present and engaged in the nonprofit sector. And a really great example of just kind of really leaning into the word of mouth. So we did a project with Misha Stallworth, who was then at the Hannon Center as the Director of Arts and Culture. And she also happens to be on the Detroit Public Schools Community District School Board. And she was in a school board meeting and talking with some leadership over at DPSCD, and they had some need for you know, some volunteers or some work to be done, and didn't have the resources for it. And so she thought of Challenge Detroit and our organization and connected us. And then we did a project with the Family and Community Engagement team at DPSCD. And I find that that happens quite a bit. Once you work with a nonprofit organization and that skills-based work that you deliver is helpful and usable and implementable for them, that then they can share about, you know, the work that you do and suggest. And so certainly that tried and true kind of referral avenue. And then I also think thinking about alignment. So if you are an organization or a company and you have some charitable giving priority areas, you know, or, you know, there's just a passion around education or something like that, trying to identify nonprofits, again, in your local community that align with that. So I think there's a lot of other ways that I would just offer up in addition to some of these matching platforms.
Yeah, that's great. And localizing it, we have a question or a comment from somebody in the audience this morning from Dawn from Alternatives for Girls. They've just started testing the waters with Catch a Fire. It's a new opportunity for them, and they'd love to connect with local corporate partners to keep these collaborative opportunities a little bit closer to home is the comment that she made. So in talking about that from a national perspective and then looking at what you have on the ground locally, Alex, talk a little bit about how JP Morgan Chase deploys their folks both on the macro and micro level. Give a sense of how many people you have on the ground here working for JP Morgan and how that works, because there's the corporate giving side, there's the volunteer side, and obviously a really large corporation. I want to melt that down with some of the other speakers as well, but how do you look at it from a macro standpoint to get the biggest bang for the buck for JP Morgan and the biggest bang for the buck for the local organizations?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we've really shifted our thinking to like spending majority of our time on skills-based volunteerism. We want to be able to support the communities as well as our employees. I think we, coming from a large corporation, we also have to think about lending our employees skill sets, putting them out in the communities, having them work with a nonprofit, a small business, a youth in the community is going to grow them as an individual and potentially a professional as well. And so that's, from the corporate side, of course, something that we have to think about as we're thinking through our programs. What I would say is we have a wide range of programs, as Gary mentioned, and I think from the both national or global lens as well as the local lens. And I'll just touch on our Service Corps program for a second, just because that's what I'm familiar with. And I know some of you on the call, maybe Shamil had the opportunity to work with us on the Service Corps. So our Service Corps program really works to strengthen a nonprofit by supporting them on a critical business challenge that they're having. And so we have always had multiple versions of our Service Corps program. Our initial program is our Field Service Corps program. And our Field Service Corps program actually started in Detroit 10 years ago. Last May was our 10th Service Corps in Detroit, and that was really special. So within 5 years, we were able to come to Detroit 10 times. And what that means is each time we come, we bring 16 individuals from across the world to come stay in Detroit for 3 weeks and work with 4 specific nonprofit organizations in the community. And we work with our program officers on the ground, who many of you may know, September Hargrove and Marlo Staples, to make connections with organizations that they're already really close with and working with in the community, as we want to push the mission further, right? We may be investing in, via capital and whatnot, but we really want to push by giving our skills and helping support that organization further. So our Field Service Corps program, we've done now over the last 5 years, because unfortunately we haven't been able to do the program in 2020. We've done over 98 projects with 360 volunteers. Given COVID, we also have our virtual Service Corps program. And, lucky enough, this program was off the ground and has existed for 3 years prior to COVID happening. But this program really allows us to support organizations from anywhere. This program allows us to, we bring volunteers together from different regions to support an organization virtually. So although we've now made a pivot to, of course, only virtual volunteering, this is something now we feel more comfortable with. I think we always wanted to be there, and we wanted our employees to have that engagement with a nonprofit on the ground and feel that special connection. And, I hope Shamil can speak to that. And I was in Detroit and I saw, how the 4 employees working with her really engaged, and they become part of the organization for 3 weeks. But I think we've all come to the realization that those connections can happen virtually. Although they may look different, we have a way to touch down in so many more places with so many more people from a virtual perspective. So I would say that's something that's extremely top of mind for us in the Service Corps program, as well as some of the other skills-based volunteerism programs we have at JP Morgan.
Shamil, did you want to comment on your experience with that and how it fit the needs?
Absolutely. I mean, it was immeasurable, at the time, and we participated in the JP Morgan Chase Service Corps, I believe 3 or 4 times. So we've had the pleasure of meeting several individuals, as she's mentioned, from across the world that not only offered an opportunity to sit down with the leadership and sit down with our board and really think outside of the box in terms of our capacity needs. But I mean, they provided drill down tangible resources and an actual portfolio of strategies that we could implement post their time with us. And it was great because it was an immersion program. They were there for 3 weeks. They were in our office. They got to, they spent time with our staff and sat down and had interviews with various board members. So, again, from a recipient end, it was really, really helpful to have just that gap space to be able to problem solve in that framework.
Great. And again, we want to invite questions as we go along here. We'll look at the chat room and grab questions as we go along. So I was part of a seminar, a webinar yesterday or the day before that the Council of Michigan Foundations put on, and it was their affinity group for corporate giving folks, and there was about 30 people on the call. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about and bring into this conversation, which get your perspective on, is that the corporations that at least were represented in the call seem to be talking about that all funding from the corporate foundations was shifting in the COVID environment to the educational world, human services and immediate needs, and then obviously with diversity, equity, and inclusion and communities of color. And I wondered if you saw that from a perspective of, is that accurate? Is that leaving some organizations behind, and smaller organizations in particular? And how do they best access corporate dollars when they seem to be focused in these three areas? You don't want the nonprofits to be on a mission chase or a mission creep, so to speak. And I wonder if that's a perception that any of you three share, and what's the best way for corporations to give their resources if everything is shifting into those three areas. Is that even accurate? And whoever wants to tackle that first or clarify that.
So I'll jump in first. Funder priorities and specific priorities that funders or corporations or any philanthropic entity is interested in giving into isn't new. There are always priorities that are either timely or of interest based upon giving strategies that those groups may have. So given that, I think the landscape around whether nonprofits should bend to the whim of the priority of the hour, I mean, obviously the answer is no. You have your mission, and your mission and the modality of your mission is central to the core of how you do your work. I think what's important in this moment in time is understanding the realities and the landscape around COVID. And I think it's early to say, because it's 6 months in, roughly 6-7 months in to the pandemic, how that's going to impact organizations that are outside of the realm of basic human needs, education, and the DEI sort of realm, especially in the landscape of Black Lives Matter, et cetera. But the reality is it's coming down the pipeline. You can anticipate going into 2021 that will most certainly be the case. So I would say for those nonprofit executives, those that are on the call today, be attuned to funder priorities in general, corporate giving strategies in general. Have conversations with every single one of your funders. Go look at the websites of foundations that you may be interested in garnering resources for, and truly understand those priorities. And that should not be the case just in 2020. That should be your general strategy for diversifying your funds in general. I think given that, knowing what the landscape is, one, really looking internally into your organization to determine whether or not, again, from a philosophical standpoint, if there are things that you should be thinking about or tuning your mission to that will make your organization more equitable, more diverse, more inclusive, then those are conversations you should most certainly be having. But for, again, in my opinion, it's really part of what should be an overall robust fund development strategy to just understand, the landscape as a whole.
Great perspective. Shelley, did you want to comment on that?
I don't have much more to add. I mean, I certainly feel very concerned about our nonprofit sector overall. Given the impact of COVID and the pandemic, and certainly we know that that Black and Brown communities and families are affected more by COVID, and a lot of the nonprofit sector is serving those communities. And so the need is really great in terms of continuing to sustain nonprofits, big or small. And I do think that even if there are nonprofits that aren't working in immediate need areas, I think they're still in existence with a mission, and that mission is probably needed too. So, I think there's a lot of uncertainty, but certainly share, deep concerns about how we can keep the nonprofit sector going. And I would say certainly there will be a continued need for skills-based volunteering, especially because we can adapt to a virtual environment in most ways.
Alex, did you want to weigh in on that?
Sure, happy to. I think, from my perspective, I don't know, the entire landscape, and I, Gary, have seen and heard what you hear, but I think from my perspective, the way we're thinking about it is we're expanding our focus areas to include inclusive recovery and not just inclusive growth in communities, because we of course have to make that shift at a time like this. But, from our side, we are still focusing on our 4 pillars that we've always focused on, and diving deeper into them, if anything, to think about how we can impact communities during this time. So for us, it's not a big shift in like these were our focus areas and now these are our focus areas. I think it's expanding our mindset on, small business, financial health, neighborhood revitalization, and workforce development, and adapting them to the COVID landscape so that we can think about recovery and not just the growth we've always wanted, but we have to get people through this. And we want them to be financially healthy. We want neighborhoods to be thriving and whatnot. So we have to work to get there. So it's really that shift for us, at least, rather than that massive change in strategy.
Great, thank you. Shamil, I wanted to go back to what one of the things you started with in this conversation, which was let's not take a broad brush on nonprofits in general or corporations in general. They all have very specific needs. So if you concentrate a little bit on the smaller nonprofits, say $1 million and under budget, and the perception is, well, I don't have a connection with JP Morgan Chase, or I'm not as well connected in the corporate community. What are some ways that you think, aside from not being shy and going for what you asked for, that smaller nonprofits can look at businesses in their community, small business, medium-sized business, not just even the bigger corporations, to partner to get more skills-based volunteers? Obviously, we talked about determining what you need first, but what are some of the ways that smaller nonprofits can access the community in a way that you've seen work, or maybe give some examples?
So that's a great question. That's really the heart and essence of running a nonprofit. I think part of it is assessing the relationship capital that you have on your team and on your board, and really looking at the network and the net worth of your network, and to be able to assess where the connections may lie and where the relationships may lie. And Shelley lifted this up. Relationships matter. Relationships are everything in the nonprofit sector. So, one, starting internally and just assessing where the branches lead you in terms of, localized relationships, and then being able to assess where the gaps are. And to the extent that, those individuals become ambassadors for your organization, whether it's your staff, your board members, maybe family members or affiliates of board members, being able to have those individuals become ambassadors for your mission. And then I would say, also look at your community assets. What's happening around you? Who are you serving? What are the families, clients, et cetera, that your mission is touching? And are there opportunities to, again, look at the network and the net worth of that network within that realm? And then then again, assess the gap. So to me, it's part of an ongoing process, whether you're 1 million and under or 1 million and up, that an organization should endeavor to do, just understanding, again, your reach, and then figure out where the connection points may lie.
So who have you seen, maybe give an example for all three of you, but we'll stay with Shamil for a minute here, on best practices and who you've seen, organizations that have done it well and corporations that have done it well, aside from JP Morgan for the time being, right? But who have you seen that has really done this strategically?
That is a great question. Ladies, what say you as I think through the roster of organizations that I know? I'm gonna punt to my fellow panelists as I think.
Well, so maybe Shelley, have you seen in the partnership with your organization, you know, or corporations that are all in and that are doing this well?
Oh, corporations. Okay.
Well,
Yeah. Corporations or nonprofits that are doing it strategically.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. I mean, Accenture, which is where I used to work pre-Challenge Detroit, they also have a robust skills-based volunteering initiative, and I got to help launch that about 10 years ago, which was definitely one of the most exciting parts of my time in consulting. That program is called Skills to Succeed, and I do believe that Accenture has a local presence here in Detroit. I know they're partnering with TechTown on some skills-based services, and I think that information is available on the TechTown website.
Great. And Kyla is pointing out MCR's work with the Bar Association on the legal clinic, and maybe you want to talk about that.
Absolutely. So I didn't obviously want to tout our own horn. I was thinking about partners, et cetera. So before I touch on that, I mean, obviously, when you lifted up corporations, Gary, there's JP Morgan Chase. Obviously, the work of Challenge Detroit is amazing. We've worked over the years with DTE volunteers, GM Cares. We've worked with the Ford volunteers. So I think there are a number of different corporate partners, most certainly, that have leaned in to support nonprofit organizations. And on the nonprofit side, there are several nonprofit organizations that I can think of, especially some of our immediate partners that are constantly thinking of innovative ways to tap into volunteers, if you will, and skilled volunteers. But as it relates to MCR's relationship with the Bar Association, again, for the last 20 years, we've been partnering with attorneys locally and now nationally through our Exponentum partnership to really find ways to leverage pro bono volunteerism and having attorneys lean in to support all of the various legal needs for nonprofit organizations. And most recently, we've been excited to launch a program that supports small businesses and working with nonprofit small business providers and a host of localized firms here in the city of Detroit, again, to provide discrete services to those small business owners. So again, you know, whether it's firms, whether it's corporations, there are several opportunities right in your backyard that you can lean into.
And do you think that nonprofits of any size should just not be shy? Obviously, you talk a lot about doing your homework, doing all this strategically, but not being shy about asking, but know what you're asking for, specifically going in. And, you know, if you go to the bigger corps, there's likely to be a match all the way along the way for any skill set. Any perspective on small to medium-sized businesses and how they can add to the skill-based giving and skill-based volunteering? We tend to think of the bigger ones like DTE and GM and JP Morgan Chase, and maybe some examples of small to medium-sized companies or venture capital groups, or just I'm looking for cross-sector collaborations that have worked in the Detroit market. Maybe give some examples aside from the bigger ones.
Gary, is that for me or is that for all panelists?
For all of you, but I'm just looking for more examples of practical solutions that have worked, but not as much with the bigger corps.
Well, I can chime in, and actually it's in response to a comment in the Q&A box from Tana, and she was asking about skills-based volunteering in universities. And so I wanted to just mention that that's another great resource or way for skills-based volunteering to happen. And just a couple of examples, the University of Michigan Ross Business School, they have a kind of student-run initiative where I think it's called Detroit Impact, and it's they partner with nonprofits and do like skills-based volunteering work. And I know, Tana, you said that you're at Wayne State, and I am pretty certain that Wayne State must have some type of programs like that. If anyone else knows, you know, maybe you can share it in the chat. But I do think that that's it's different than small to medium-sized businesses. But I think again, we want to acknowledge that there are lots of different types of individuals and groups that can give and serve in this way, and certainly students, college students, graduate students also have skills and talents to contribute.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a whole area we didn't even think about in this, so I'm really glad that that you brought that up. Switching gears for just a second, I want to throw this over to Alex. When you look at, you know, the standard perception is that the corporations are doing this to build community, obviously, but from a PR or image standpoint. But I think JP Morgan Chase does it in a much deeper way as part of your pillars, as you talked about. So how do you measure the impact that you've had on specific communities? And then how does a nonprofit measure the impact that a corporation or a business partner has had so that it brings more business credibility to the organization and to the company itself? So we're talking about measurement here.
Yeah, Gary, that's a great question, and something that I'm living through right now, and I think is a challenge, at least for us, and I assume for many people, because, you know, to your point, when we like the Service Corps, for example, or any of our skills-based volunteerism programs, we're working with partners of our foundation or grantees of JP Morgan Chase as a whole. So we're working to really, and we're figuring this out live, I would say, is figuring out how we determine the impact of, you know, the Service Corps program compared to, you know, the $100,000 grant you may have received from JP Morgan as well. And how do we determine the impact of having 5 or 4 volunteers on the ground versus the $100,000. And so I would say it's something we're currently working through, and it's funny you bring it up because we're struggling with it. And I think we're trying to figure out how we currently capture a lot of data from our grantees, individuals or organizations that go through our skills-based volunteerism programs. We ask them to complete surveys. They complete them immediately following the project, as well as like 9 to 12 months after, so we can get a read on, you know, where they were right after, as well as, you know, about a year later, so we can see the changes that were made and be able to hopefully tell the story of, because, you know, we had a team come and support this organization, maybe they have increased revenue, or they received additional funding, or they're able to start a new program. But I think it's really hard to be able to pick out the difference of, was that due to the skills-based volunteerism, or was that due to the grant from, whether it be the same corporate that's giving it to you, or maybe another corporation has also given you capital that is supporting. So I would say it's an ongoing challenge, but something we're really closely working with right now to figure out how we can depict the impact of our programs and separate them out. So it's not just, we can definitely tell a story of, you know, working with X organization, we've done X, Y, Z. But we definitely want to be able to pull out what our volunteers have contributed and how it not only hopefully changed the organization, but all of their beneficiaries in the communities that they're working in.
So, and I want to throw this over to Shmail on this question, which is, okay, you have JP Morgan, so say you're a community-based nonprofit and JP Morgan is funding that to whatever degree they are. Is the burden on the small nonprofits or any size nonprofits really, from a reporting standpoint, okay, you have federal funding, you have state funding, you have 7 corporations that are helping, 3 foundations that are helping, individual donors. Is there a burden on the nonprofits themselves to hire and have people in place just on the reporting mechanisms so that the impact is measured the right way? Is that even an issue?
I mean, so with fund development as a whole, there's always the requirement and the responsibility of all things. That's the acquisition of the dollars, figuring out, again, from an accounting standpoint, an allocation standpoint, and most certainly a reporting standpoint. So I wouldn't necessarily use the word burden. I would say that it's a responsibility, right? It's your responsibility as a nonprofit leader to figure out, or the leadership, if you will. And when I say leader, I don't necessarily mean position, but those that are responsible for seeking out opportunities to think through all of the pieces that are related to acquiring dollars and figuring out the reporting standpoint. Now, that said, that's the reality of the responsibility. The reality of how that works out in terms of capacity is different for every organization. Some organizations have a fully functioning, robust fund development team that, there's several individuals that are working on several elements of that. There are other organizations where one person is wearing 50 different hats. You have the ED, who's also the grant writer, who's also probably washing the dishes and figuring out how to deploy all of the programmatic services. So to me, that's the opportunity when we think through how to increase the resilience of nonprofits, that corporate partners can plug in, fund development and philanthropy can plug in to help, again, allay some of those tensions as it relates to capacity gaps for nonprofit organizations.
That's a really interesting point, because it might be that one of the skills that are needed by the nonprofits is in measuring and having somebody, so that the burden is not on the one person wearing 7 different hats, is that maybe somebody from a corporation that brings some best practices in can perceive that and have that and lift up their reporting mechanism. An opportunity that might be out there. Shelley, did you have a perspective on that question?
I wanted to just chime in and again offer a little bit of a different side, which is, but related to measurement. I would certainly first echo some of the challenges that both Alex and Shamil already expressed. But something that I think is important to also include around the topic of impact and measurement, especially with skills-based volunteerism, is the qualitative side of things. And so, of course, for funding and reporting, we need metrics and data and quantitative information. But I think, at least in our experience, we've found that the more the testimonials and the kind of impact on the people that were involved really matters, and that it's important to capture that. And then I also think it's really important to debrief on how the partnership, how the project, how the initiative went. I think it's really important to think about all of the people that you can ask. That's something that we do after every project partnership at the end of every program year, in the spirit of wanting to strengthen these collaborations and improve them. And so, listening to the nonprofit that you did the work with, even trying to see if you can connect with maybe some of their stakeholders, certainly your volunteers or your, the cohort of people, how did they feel? How do they, both from a process standpoint, but also, and I think this ties into some research, right? We know that doing this type of work gives people meaning and purpose and fulfillment. And I think time and again, I heard that both in the corporate sector and then in the work in the community that I do now with our fellows, our alumni, that it really connects to people at a human level to be learning and serving alongside in your community in this work. And so those ways of understanding the work and trying to capture that, I think that's really important in this discussion too.
Great. I want to talk a little bit about the changing demographics and what you're seeing out there. And it's really interesting that somebody from the audience brought up the need for volunteers from the from higher ed or where they're at in the community as an individual volunteer. And the other end of the spectrum is, a lot of corporations. I can think of DTE locally that's doing a lot with their volunteer base of people that are about to retire or people that have retired from longtime service in DTE. And I think they even have somebody specifically on staff either at the foundation or within DTE that looks at retirees and what they can bring to the table with their expertise. So it's everything from the student all the way up to the retiree or the current corporate volunteer. Are there any demographic changes that you're seeing generationally that might be important to bring up to this audience as examples of either corporations that are doing it well or needs in the community to tap expertise, whether it's from students or from retirees or anything in the middle, the changing demographics of skill-based volunteering? Does anybody want to tackle that and what they're perceiving?
Well, I certainly acknowledge, and I think this is really important, that we realize that people bring skills, talents, gifts, experience across, I think it spans generation, right? And so certainly acknowledging that, retirees still have more to give and have certainly seen interest in that population or demographic. And then I would also, push us a little to think about who else, right? So there are certainly individuals and groups that can contribute that we might not always go to, right? Whether it's around age or generation or ability or background. And I think something that we really emphasize and lift up in our work is diversity of collaboration. So the more perspectives and voices you have contributing to a project or doing some type of problem solving, the better that and stronger that solution can be. So I would offer that. And then I would also say, are we including youth? There's a lot of different perspectives that can really make these projects and these collaborations effective and successful.
Any other perspectives on that?
I would just echo what Shelley said. I think thinking outside the box, and I think sometimes we expect, when we have skills-based volunteers, you expect this middle of the run, volunteer, where, to Shelley's point, youth, retirees, everyone has something to give, and bringing new perspectives is only going to help you think outside the box and think through things or bring a perspective that you wouldn't have thought of. Because if you have a group of everyone in their mid-30s, then they may all have very similar perspectives, even if they're coming from different backgrounds, because they're in that same generation. So really pulling people together from different groups and different areas, times in their life, can really, I think, add something to the work that you're getting and allow you to think differently about the work you do every day.
Yeah, I would also offer that it's important, at least for the purposes of one, understanding the need and how you're making that match to, connect to, problem solving around that need, is untethering skills with corporations or untethering skills with a particular degree, or just the notion that, someone with a skill has to come from this particular background or has to look like this or be like this. There are skill sets that organizations need on an everyday basis that are right in your backyard, that are your clients, that are your community members, that are your neighbors. So again, to me, it's really important to understand what your needs are and what the end goal is. If the end goal is to make a corporate relationship, then perhaps that's the pathway you're going down. If it's really about, okay, we have this particular need in our organization that requires someone to do X, Y, Z, to me, it's about taking inventory of who's in your network and understanding how those individuals, whether they're young people, whether they're seniors, whether they're everyone in between, can offer up, again, that unique skill to offer to your mission's advancement.
Yeah, Alex, you brought up a really interesting point, and it came up in one of these webinars I was in the other day, which is the volunteer experience across generations when they're in a volunteer activity or whether they're in a board meeting, whatever it is getting the other generation's perspective on things that makes it a more robust volunteer experience, so that it's not just Gen Xers volunteering with Gen Xers, it's the retirees helping paint at World Medical Relief and then interacting on a different level with other generations to get a different perspective, or not only that, but a different perspective from other people, from communities of color, from an all-white organization that's been perceived that way. So it goes across all demographics, I think. And I wonder if you're seeing that play out, where the volunteer activity is not just one single thing, and you're mixing people up to get other perspectives, and they're having great experiences that will allow them to come back.
Yeah, I would definitely say we place as much of a focus as we can on bringing diverse groups together, diverse in terms of like just from different demographics, to support on a skills-based volunteerism project. I think overall we see bringing so many different perspectives in really helps push people to think differently, right? And maybe it's not even from the nonprofit side, but just from the volunteer side. Like if a few people who don't work together every day are together and they're thinking through a problem set, then they're going to be able to think differently than they do, while sitting at their desk and maybe crunching numbers or whatever it may be that they do in their day job. They're putting on a different hat, and they're learning from one another, as well as learning from the organization in which they're supporting during their, skills-based volunteerism opportunities. So I think just like the information sharing going every which way adds so much to an organization. And that's, to be honest, one of the things we do for our Field Service Corps program when we can is the focus is on global participants. So you're not just bringing people in from Detroit or just from the US, you're bringing people in globally. So you have someone's perspective from India, someone's perspective from the UK, and people live very different lives around the world. So bringing those perspectives together, I think, adds so much unique thinking, and adds a lot to the projects that we do.
Yeah, and it also humanizes the volunteer experience, right?
Definitely.
And
Exactly.
There's a couple other areas that I wanted to talk about, but I want to make sure that we allow time, not just at the end, but we can inject some questions here as we go along with the audience. We have about 45 to 47 people listening to this. And if you have questions that we haven't touched on, this is the time to bring them up. And the other two things that I wanted to talk about, one, and any of the three of you can answer this, are there certain types of businesses, and I'm thinking specifically minority-owned businesses, that might be able, or it could be women-owned businesses. Cranes has a great list of minority-owned businesses in southeastern Michigan. To be able to, are those organizations, from what you're seeing, those businesses looking to place people on nonprofit boards or in communities, are they tapped enough in your perception to be able to give expertise from maybe a little bit different, a different viewpoint from the other way around, corporate to nonprofit? Are you seeing that, or is that not, I'm looking for best practices in that area or examples of? Nope. Okay. I do want to tap, you can think about that. I do want to tap into one other area that we haven't talked about specifically.
I think Shelley was going to say something, and then
I'm sorry.
That's
I missed
okay.
that. Sorry, Shelley.
Oh, no worries. We're reflecting before we speak, I think.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yep. Well, I'm really interested to hear what Shamil has to say, but I just wanted to really recognize that I think that there's just so much space to think creatively about where we're pulling perspective from. So on the volunteering side, I just wanted to say, and I think it kind of relates to what you're talking about, so I'll make the link, but I also think that nonprofit people that work in nonprofit can also be really, really great at doing skills-based projects in other nonprofit organizations.
Absolutely.
And we actually have fellows that are placed at nonprofits, and then every Friday we're doing projects with other nonprofits. And what we find is that we know that all of these social issues and urban needs and issues, all of these missions are interconnected and intersect, right, in the social sector. So education and transportation and economic growth and, they all intersect, they all connect in some way. And so when you bring people that work in these different missions and different nonprofits and they kind of lend their perspective, it can really enhance the work. And so likewise, I think that someone who works in the nonprofit sector absolutely can have a lot to offer, back into the corporate space. But anyways, I'll turn it over to Shamil.
No, I mean, you really lifted up the point that I was going to make, which is, again, I really hope that the one thing that we're left with at the end of this conversation is that there is no one size fits all, approach as it relates to how you define nonprofit needs or what the nonprofit may look like. And the same goes with volunteers and skilled-based volunteers. They come from all over. They can come from all over, whether it's a nonprofit organization, a corporation, whether it's, a neighbor, a friend. The point being is it's the spirit of volunteerism, and it's about having a particular skill that you can match with an organization. But to your point, Gary, I think there are individuals that work in small businesses, whether it's small businesses that are operated by people of color, women of color, and all the likes that would be interested, should be interested in connecting to nonprofit organizations. To me, it's about the knowledge of where those nonprofits are, what their unique needs are, and how those matches are made, and how you can look to the various platforms, whether it's web-based platforms, to lift up your needs or make those connections on a localized level to those individuals that work at, all over your community that can help to support your mission. And to me, that's the essence of it. It's how can we continue to foster good relationships, foster good connections, so that you can connect to JP Morgan Chase, you can connect to Challenge Detroit, and all of the various opportunities that are out there in our ecosystem.
It's really intriguing is one of the things that I'm picking up throughout this conversation is the need for maybe a local matching mechanism that people can tie into. It seems a little bit scattershot, and I think people maybe are a little bit frustrated by it. I remember back in the day, there was something called Volunteer Impact that was really big in Detroit, but it sort of fell by the wayside because the matching aspect of it was never really the way it should be. But the number of activities that people can plug into and the matching with the use of technology might be something that one of the foundations or even COAC can look at a little bit down the road. I think there probably is some matching going on with the use of tech, but I'm not as familiar with it. But it just seems like there's a hole there to be able to plug in a better matching mechanism.
Great point. So one thing that I want to lift up, Gary, really quickly, and we're really on the cusp of it, in partnership with COAC, MCR, and some of our other partners around building a network. We've been looking at the development of this resource navigation, if you will, tool, and a web-based tool by which organizations can identify their unique needs. And then on the back end, if you will, there will be service providers, there will be corporate partners, there will be the plethora of individuals and entities that are looking to plug in to support nonprofit organizations. So it's in early beta development, but to your point, it's a huge gap, it's a huge need, but it's something that we are working diligently on right now. So for those on the line, stay tuned. We're in the process of trying to get to the other side of this.
Great. So again, we don't have any current questions that are in the queue here, but I did want to hit on one other topic with some of the time that we have left. And we talked a little bit about it, but I want to talk about boards in particular and get your perspectives on some of the needs that organizations have for board members that may be a little bit more representative of the communities that they serve, and board service as a skill-based volunteering aspect of things, to get your perspective on it, good or bad, examples that are out there, the matching of board members from the corporations into the nonprofits. Alex, do you have, is that an area as one of your pillars or one of your areas that JP Morgan Chase looks at when looking at individual cities that you're in?
Yeah, so we have a board service program, and there's multiple facets of the program, but one of the facets is that we work to place JP Morgan Chase employees on the boards of some of our grantee partners. We're very, very strategic about these. So it's not just, oh, this person needs a board member, let's place them. But we really try and think market by market, which organizations, when there's a board opening and they're looking for support, how we can best support those organizations by finding the employees at JP Morgan who have that whatever that niche skill set might be to best support the organization. I would also say on a larger scale, over the last 2 years, we've been really focused on board service and expanded our program, where we actually have a program now that allows employees, they go through a training program, and then they have the opportunity to get matched and then elected to a nonprofit board. And so we do this through an intermediary. But again, skill matching, there's a website, that does all of that work on our behalf, but it's a great way for employees to be able to find a board that matches their personal interest areas, passions. As JP Morgan Chase Foundation, we obviously have our pillars and our focus areas, but we don't want to stifle employees from, being on boards of areas that they're really passionate about. So we definitely make sure to give employees that opportunity as well, so that they can find those organizations that really fit them, and hopefully, get elected to the board and really contribute in a meaningful way.
And it probably adds to employee retention, I would guess.
It is. It's something we don't specifically tie it to employee retention right now. But yes, I think, giving employees outlets to further engage in their communities, we're hoping that brings them joy in working for JP Morgan, that their company offers these opportunities to engage outside of their, daily workday. So yes, we definitely think it increases, or we hope it increases employee satisfaction and makes them want to stay at the company.
Shelley, did you have a perspective on that from a board standpoint? I know you probably serve on boards and you probably see it from the matching standpoint from the fellowship too. So what are you seeing?
My two quick comments on this are, one, I do think or believe there may be an opportunity to improve and get more creative in helping bring people these opportunities in Detroit to serve on boards. So again, more women, more people of color, and even just making it known that these are opportunities, and specifically at wherever there's an opening. I know Shamil might have more insight into if there's anything being built up, or Gary, I know you do a lot with boards too, but I've definitely had people ask, how do I find out about, an opportunity to be on a board? And then my second point would be just thinking about preparing our pipeline of leaders to serve on boards. And something that I think is really powerful about our fellowship programming and how we're really helping develop community-minded leaders earlier on in their career is that I do believe that having more awareness and understanding by working alongside nonprofits in Detroit's neighborhoods and the work that we do within our program gives more context, and taking that type of experience and awareness and humility into board seats, I think is really important. So having some type of connection to your community or to the organization's work in the community as a board member, I think is really important. And I think our fellows are getting some of that experience earlier on. And I think it does change the trajectory of how they serve and contribute in their career.
And there's a lot of shifts that are going on in the type of board governance. Some really great examples that are out there. But Shamil, did you want to comment on that?
I think both of the comments that were made were spot on. The only other thing that I would offer and add is that I would caution that as we think about board service, that training is incredibly important. What I've observed in many cases is that board service tends to be part of a resume builder activity for individuals looking to expand their network as, in connecting to nonprofit organizations. And there are nuanced needs that nonprofits have. And just because you may have a particular skill set or particular position in your respective corporation doesn't necessarily mean that once you're on that board, you know exactly what to do and how to meet the mission and the needs of that unique nonprofit. And the size of the nonprofit, the capacity needs of the nonprofit also matters. There are nonprofit boards that are advisory boards, that are nonprofit boards that are working boards, and really understanding the difference, whether you may be required to roll up your sleeve and dig in a way that you weren't necessarily prepared for, or you may be asked to rubber stamp a few things. So again, the point being is understanding your value proposition before joining a board and why you're joining that board, knowing truly what that organization is about, having an opportunity to sit down and talk to the executive director and other board members to, again, understand that organization's unique needs, and then making the decision of, okay, is this the right fit for me? But more importantly, there's, again, that gap space between making that decision and the necessary training as it relates to being prepared to be a steward of a nonprofit organization, because that's not a position that anyone should take lightly.
No, and you and I have had this conversation before where we talked about the culture and chemistry of
That's right.
boards, and you're tapped for a certain expertise, but you can't be shy in your first year and just sit back. You're tapped for your expertise. And so the more you know about the culture and chemistry of the organization and the board in particular going in, it's a great point that you brought up in a previous conversation. I'm sure that people can reflect on that. We have about 5 minutes left. Is there any other comments about board governance or board matching that anybody wants to throw into the mix? Nope. We do have a question that I think somebody had for Alex, and it was what outside source do you use as the intermediary? I think the question went off the screen here, but I think that was the question. What's the intermediary organization that you use?
Yeah, for board service, we use an organization called Cause Strategy Partners. And we partner with them on the entire program, as well as thinking through, they help facilitate trainings with our employees. So in different markets, we offer trainings on, 101, like what a nonprofit is, how to get in, what the responsibilities of a board may be. And then they help us dive deeper into that content as we, find the employees that are really interested in getting matched to a board. I think, to Shamil and Shelley's point, we don't want an employee to just be on a board and to be on a board for the resume, for the, for that reason. They really need to understand the amount of work and the reason that they're on that board, right? I think we all know, like, when you're on a board, there's a certain skill set that we've said is being tapped for you to be there. And so we want people to feel like they know what that is. And when they're placed on the board and, entering those first meetings that first year, they really understand what their responsibilities of being a board member are. So we really try and do our best to share that information with our employees as well as we can from a training perspective, early on before they get to that board match, the time. So it's something we really focus on, because we don't want to hear from, especially the organizations we work really closely with, to hear that we have a board member who's just isn't available or can't give the time and it's not working out. We really want to make sure that we're making matches that are beneficial for both the employee as well as for the organization.
That's great. And later on this fall, I'll be launching with a business partner something called Corporate Social Strategists, which is a matching and a mentoring service specifically for corporations, looking at ROI for the corporations and how they can benefit community. We have one last question, and somebody asked, will the panelists' contact information, emails, be available after the session? I would hope so. We can throw that over to Charnay. And then also a couple of plugs here for the next session that's coming up is November the 6th. It's going to be a post-election review the same week as the presidential election, having some quick reflections on both the election itself and how it relates to the nonprofit sector and corporate giving and sort of in real time. So I wanted to plug, and you'll look at the COACT website for that information. And also there's a feedback mechanism that we want. There's a survey that we can continue to improve this program that everybody will be getting. So if you can take, you should be getting that in your email stream from COACT with some feedback about this session and about what you might see going forward in 20 and 21 about corporate social responsibility. But in looking to wrap up, I wanted to thank everybody, but I also want to give some time for any closing questions from the audience or any closing comments from the group, areas that we haven't hit on that might be relevant to folks that are still on the line. Any wrap-up comments or rebuttals? Alex, I'll throw that to you first.
Definitely no rebuttals. It's been great to learn from both Shamil and Shelley today. And I would just say, I think skills-based volunteerism has really shifted in the light of COVID. And I think just all of us being aware that as we're going, you know, it's been a few months now, but we're all still figuring it out together. And I think, you know, from the corporate perspective, we want to make sure that, you know, the shifts that we're making are just as impactful for organizations as our in-person programs were. So just, I think, you know, the mindset of being flexible and sharing with your corporate partners what you need, what's not working, what is working. Because I think, you know, having corporate funders, we don't want to come in and work with you if it's not beneficial for your organization. And so really want to make sure that you all speak up and share your feedback, I think, with your corporate partners so we can enhance and better serve the community.
And to be honest with the feedback, right?
Definitely. Yep.
Yeah.
Don't, you know, I think a lot of times we're also funders. And so there can be a hesitation on the feedback, but we want your feedback, right? If we just get positive feedback, then we're going to keep doing our programs as is, you know, maybe with minor changes of things we see that can be better, but without all of your feedback or receiving programs, we really can't make those big changes to make sure that we're making an impact for your organization and your communities.
Great. Shelley, any closing comments?
Yeah, real quickly, of course, echo the flexibility. It's so needed. We actually did a project with Shamil's organization. We have 2 alumni fellow on staff, and our project was during COVID, and we completely changed the project to be more responsive to the needs of some neighborhood organizations. And so that willingness to truly listen to what the needs of the nonprofit are. And I will add that this humility and acknowledgement that the nonprofits and their community members are the experts in their mission or their work. And while we're bringing our skills and our talents, it's really a collaboration. And so something that we talk a lot about in our fellowship is to have that humility, to be willing to learn, and to acknowledge that it's really a partnership and a collaboration, and that these nonprofits, they have just as much to offer us as we have to offer them.
Great, thank you. And Shamil, any closing comments?
So Shelley, first let me say you stole the thunder. Yes. I would echo everything that you just said and that Alex said as well. Most certainly it is a partnership, it is collaborative, and it's really relationship driven. I mean, this is a relationship asset tool that can help drive not only services and solutions to your organization, but by virtue of these connections, to Gary, your point, you can end up with future board members. In our case, we have Challenge Detroit staff on our team. We've hired, you know, individuals on our team that have come through various walks of our relationships and connections over the way. So the only thing that I would say that's different from what Alex and Shelley offered is that there's oftentimes a power dynamic that exists when corporate partners come in to support nonprofit organizations. And I think that's something that we should be very aware of and be very transparent in having those conversations, and particularly corporate partners that may also have a philanthropic arm like a JP Morgan Chase, where there may be dollars connected to the particular service or the hope of getting future dollars once you apply for that particular program, and just understanding how that may shift the relationship and the transparency that an organization may come to in that partnership. So those things I think just need to be acknowledged up front and work through that, so that again you have the maximum benefit for both sides. The employees that are coming in from the corporate side, or the skilled volunteers that are coming in from the corporate side, get a good experience, and then the nonprofit organizations get a good experience. But overall, I think the piece around just equitable mindsets coming to the table to be solutionaries, to me, is the point at hand. This is not a top-down approach. This is an organization that has incredible leaders that for whatever reason may have a gap in their capacity, and you have a group of individuals that have increased capacity to come together and make magic happen. So all in all, it's been great for us. We've been on both sides of the table, and thank you all for listening.
So did you just invent a new word, solutionary?
Actually, no, I didn't invent that, but I use it all the time.
Yeah, love it. Great. So what a great perspective from the panel. We really appreciate what you do in your communities and specifically in the Detroit region. We appreciate your time. I don't know if Kyla or Shanae wanted to end with anything here, but I just wanted to express my appreciation for a great conversation, great questions from the audience, and hopefully we'll see everybody at the end of November, maybe in person. You never know. So thank you so much. And I don't know if Kyla, you wanted to end with anything, or we're all done.
I'll just echo my gratitude. Thank you to everyone that was able to join us today. And thank you so much to all of our panelists and Gary for moderating another great conversation. Please do fill out the survey that our team has shared in the chat, and we'll follow up with an email link as well. We really appreciate any feedback so that we can continue to improve and make these conversations meaningful for everyone. Thanks so much. Stay safe and be healthy, and have a great rest of the day.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.